We are strangers in space, and for however long it takes, we are going to be kicking the backside of Gamdom so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Simon.
Okay, so we ain't necessarily going to be kicking anybody's backside, but obviously there was big news today as we record this, and I suppose I'll be getting this out as quickly as possible, so it might still be today by the time you're hearing it. And that is that Jodie Whittaker and Chris Chibnall together are leaving. And of course, we haven't talked yet about the trailer or the Comic-Con panel, which we were planning to get together and talk about in brief tonight anyway. So I guess we'll have that conversation too. First of all, though, Simon, Matt, either of you remotely surprised to hear that Jodie Whittaker's leaving and that Chris Chibnall's going with her?
I'm surprised it's the two together, if I'm honest. I expected Jodie to go, but didn't know what Mr. Chibnall's plans were. You kind of assume that they do more than one Doctor, but obviously not. Obviously, he's done what he wanted to do and has decided to move on.
See, the thing is, if Christopher Eccleston hadn't left after one series, Russell T Davies would only have done one Doctor. Russell T Davies only did 4 series. He only did 6 years in the job, 6 or 7 years in the job. Chris Chibnall will have done, by the autumn of next year, 6 years in the job, something like that. And he'll have done 3 series because Doctor Who's a bit slower now than it was then. But really, I think Stephen Moffat's the outlier. And when Chibnall started, and Matt, I'm sure you remember this conversation, we said this is a guy who's more interested in doing things like Broadchurch and the Great Train Robbery and United, programs like that, than he is in doing Doctor Who. He's taken it on, but I'm sure in our conversation when we found out he got the job, we said he'll probably just do one Doctor and leave after that. Matt, is that? I'm sure we said that.
Probably. I'm not surprised, but then rumours of his departure and Jodie Whittaker's departure happen every year since they started. The impression I've always got from Chris Chibnall is he's a bit of a sort of, not JFK, JNT producer who's sort of enthusiastic for the change and to sort of set the series in a different direction, but then quite keen to go from the very beginning. So once he's put his mark on it, then he's out. So I never thought of him as a sort of a long haul producer. And I don't think Stephen Moffat would have been a long haul producer. He had to be persuaded to stay 2 or 3 times, I think.
Well, yes, Stephen Moffat originally planned to go with Matt Smith. Yeah. And had Matt Smith done the 4th year that was intended, as I understand it, Stephen Moffat would have left. But as it was, Matt Smith left a year earlier than anybody expected. So Stephen Moffat ended up writing the first series for Matt Smith's successor and thus stayed on to do another series after that. So there wasn't this weird thing. Because Doctors do come and go with the showrunners. That is, I don't know, that's a pretty standard thing. There's been, I looked, I said on my social media that I wasn't looking, but before we set up recording, I had 20 minutes to waste. So I did have a quick look around to see what a handful of people were saying. And one of the things people are saying and always do say is, I wish we could have seen what Jodie Whittaker's Doctor would have been like under a different showrunner. There's no way a Doctor and a showrunner don't leave at the same time, because that actor is somebody who's come to work for that showrunner, and when that showrunner departs the job, that's the actor's job gone too. Because when a new showrunner comes in, that's not just a new writer to oversee the production, that is in essence a new production team and a new program as well. And although a lot of the production team probably will stay on because it's being made by the BBC and because it's being made in the same studio, essentially the sort of upper echelons of the behind the scenes team, the sort of creatives at the heart of the program, they're a new bunch of people with a new vision, and that means new actors doing the jobs. They're setting up basically a new program. When Stephen Moffat took over from Russell T Davies, it was, to all intents and purposes, a new program. And when Chris Chibnall took over from Stephen Moffat, it was, to all intents and purposes, a new program. And that's what we'll have again when Christopher Chibnall goes. So I don't know. I wasn't remotely surprised to hear it. I I guess the biggest surprise I had was to hear it so soon after the Comic-Con panel. So they have this big panel at the weekend, which is a big bit of publicity about the forthcoming series. And then, 4 days later, 5 days later, whatever it is, suddenly we'll find out, oh, and not only will we be back in the autumn, but then we'll be gone.
I mean, I guess Comic-Con is about the upcoming series, which Jodie. So there's a balance to be made that if you're selling the upcoming series, you're saying Jodie Whittaker's definitely in it and is definitely on board. Chris Chibnall is committed to this series. He's definitely on board. So you don't say that at Comic-Con, but then you say it afterwards. Sometimes they release this
soon afterwards, yeah.
Then they release this information when something else is going to be announced or something is going to become apparent.
Yeah.
Which presumably is, I'm hoping, is Chris Chibnall's replacement, because once they've announced whoever they are, that's the sort of future of the show secured. It's when they don't say that, and I'm assuming the BBC have found someone else.
Well, there's a big conversation to be had about that. I think maybe we'll wait a few minutes to say that. Simon, the point I was making was this was really soon afterwards. Yeah, Matt's point is absolutely right, that the Comic-Con is about the things that you're definitely going to get. But this release of this information now, so soon afterwards, seems to me just to undermine that slightly, because it's, in a way, it says, come and watch this because this is your last chance to see these two people working on this program together for a sustained period of time. So in a way, it draws you to it. But in another way, it completely undermines the fact that you're trying to sell a sort of consistent, coherent, upcoming series by saying, well, these are people who've already decided to leave.
If it was any other series, I'd agree with you, but I think because the idea of change is so integral to the program, and that's quite an exciting thing. I think it's self-propelling as far as promotion's concerned. So that whole discussion about who's the next Doctor, the fact that those episodes next year will all lead up to Jodie's departure, and obviously there's going to build up some kind of climax. So I don't know. I don't think it quite works like that. I mean, I did start wondering whether somebody had let something slip at Comic-Con, and therefore they were trying to get that information out as soon as possible to preempt that. But who knows? But I just don't think these things damage the program. I don't know if I agree that the showrunner goes with the Doctor or vice versa, because wouldn't Russell T Davies have done at least 1 year with David Tennant? Because it always felt like David Tennant was in the sidelines anyway to take over.
No, I think David Tennant was the obvious choice because they were suddenly left with this gap to fill. I think if Christopher Eccleston had stayed for the second series, then you'd have been a year further on from Tennant having just done Casanova. And David Tennant did the voiceover for that preview program they put out before Rose back in 2005. Again, that was a one-off. And I think he did that because he was still around as a sort of hangover from the Casanova production. I think if it had been another year, David Tennant wouldn't have felt anything like as obvious a replacement, because he felt like a really obvious replacement because you had a storm of things all happening at the same time in the same week. Matt looks like he's desperate to say something.
I think the slight argument, I think, is that the other end of David Tennant, because he's asked to stay on a year as continuity. And I think that's partly because obviously Stephen Moffat's quite closely tied to the series even under RTD, so there is that kind of, there's an overlap with showrunners. I'm assuming the similar thing isn't going to happen this time, but that depends on the identity of the showrunner. If it's Pete McTighe, then maybe. But
they've already announced that Jodie's going, so I don't think that's even a conversation to be had. Of course, the other thing about David Tennant is being asked to stay on. On the one hand, I don't think necessarily that Stephen Moffat would in his heart have wanted him to stay on, because I think Stephen Moffat would have wanted to start afresh. But we've discussed this. I think Stephen Moffat for that first year was on probation with the BBC because, we forget Stephen Moffat wasn't nearly as tried and tested a writer and a showrunner in 2010 as he was by the time Sherlock had hit the screens. And so, although Russell T Davies nominated Stephen Moffat, I don't think the BBC would necessarily have been knocking at Moffat's door had Russell T Davies not nominated him. So I think to a degree, Stephen Moffat was on probation for that first series in 2010, and asking David Tennant to stay on would have been a way of helping to ensure that Doctor Who was successful. As it was, Matt Smith was a massive success, so nobody needed to worry. But there was that big worry going into Series 5 in 2010 that Doctor Who was suddenly going to fall flat on its face. Nobody knew. So I think the Tennant situation there is slightly more complicated, but I think the way that worked out and the way other things have worked out kind of tends to point at the idea that a doctor and a showrunner will tend to come and go with each other, rather than, because who wants to come in and on what is already a job that other people have done and take over somebody else's showrunnership and have to finish off their story for them, as it were. That's not really an ideal situation, is it? Shall we talk about, before we talk about what we think might happen, because obviously we're going to have a conversation about what the sort of 2022 is going to look like and what might happen after that, because of course 2023 is the 60th anniversary year. So there are a few things to talk about future wise. Who might the next showrunner be? Who might the next Doctor be? So on and so forth. Shall we talk a little bit about the trailer, about the Comic-Con panel, and about these 6 episodes as it transpires we're getting in the autumn? So they said that they were going to go into the studio, and because of COVID regulations, they were probably only going to be able to record 8 episodes. And they went into the studio with an 8-episode plan, and they said, you know, it might be that we don't get to record all 8, or it might be that we get to record more than 8, but 8 is our plan. And people kind of assumed that that meant 7 in the autumn plus 1 at Christmas or New Year, whatever. As it transpires, that's 6 in the autumn, 1 at Christmas, and 1 in the spring, presumably Easter. I mean, that's yet to be determined, but I guess Easter is the more obvious place. And as it happens, that rumor had been spreading for at least a couple of months anyway. I'd read it in 2 or 3 places that people were saying it's going to be 6 and 2 specials. Whether that was speculation or whether somebody knew, I don't know. 6 in the autumn then, and of course, the big thing about it, and I think there are 2 big things about it. The big thing about it, though, is it's going to be all one story, these 6 episodes. And Chris Chibnall has kind of said that that was sort of forced on him by COVID, because I guess if it had been 10 episodes, there's a possibility there would have been an arc story across 6 of them, and 4 would have been separate from the arc, like in Series 12. Because if you look back to Series 12, 6 of those episodes are arc episodes and 4 are separate. So what Chris Chibnall's basically done is got rid of the 4 separated episodes and just had 6 arc ones. So assuming it wasn't the plan to do that anyway, because I wouldn't have been surprised if it had been the plan to do that, and I think we've talked about that too. But assuming it wasn't, do we think that's going to work out well? Or in other words, the question I'm sort of asking is, do you think Series 12 might have been a slightly more sort of consistent series if the 4 non-arc episodes hadn't been there? Regardless of whether you think they're any good or not, do you think it would have been more consistent, maybe more compelling, if it had just been the 6 arc episodes, that being the 2 parts of Spyfall, the Jodie episode, and then the 3 episodes at the end? Simon, you look like you want to say something.
Only in as much as Chris Chibnall's track record with what he seems comfortable with, you know, with Broadchurch and its ilk, is far more down his line, and maybe that would have worked in its favour. Yeah, maybe he would then be able to do things as he's used to, and you know, you can't argue that Broadchurch isn't compelling, so therefore he does have that ability of creating an ongoing and, you know, a progressive plot and narrative. So in that respect, I think it's a good move for him to be able to do it before he leaves, just so we can see how that feels.
Yeah, because of course people are comparing this now with Trial of a Time Lord, but it's nothing like as long as Trial of a Time Lord, and it's gonna Trial of a Time Lord was like a regular formatted Doctor Who story or series of Doctor Who stories with a wraparound thing. This is going to be something slightly different, I would assume. They are leaning into it. So they talked at the Comic-Con about the fact that there are going to be cliffhangers at the end of each episode that are going to make you desperate to come back the next week and find out what happens next. So they're definitely leaning into the ongoing story thing. Matt, we talked when Fugitive of the Jadoon went out. and the next episode trailer came up and it was Praxius, we talked, or certainly it was mentioned, is that going to be another arc story? Are we going to be back to non-arc stories? One of the things that people complained about in Series 6 under Stephen Moffat, because I think the 5 Moffat episodes that make up Series 6 are really compelling. And then in between, some of the episodes are great, but you kind of lose the momentum. And people complained about the fact that the arc story in Series 6 was so heavy that going to episodes that were unconnected in between felt like a real leap, because the characters felt like they weren't engaged with the arc stuff anymore. Amy, particularly with her child, but the ongoing arc story anyway. So, Matt, the question I'm asking you is, having 6 episodes without the other episodes in between, is that going to be less of a jump? Are you looking forward to seeing a series that doesn't have those non-related episodes?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be much difference because I think even with 6 episodes, they're not just going to set it in one place in one time and tell Broadchurch. It's not going to be set in like Sanditon or whatever. So it's still going to be Doctor Who bouncing around, but with it's more like The Chase than Trial of the Time Lord. So it's only more sophisticated, hopefully. But what's the difference really? There are cliffhangers at the end of each episode. That's going to be good. But I never minded the filler episodes either, the ones between the arc stories. I think I agree that there's always the risk that the filler episodes are a bit weird and they kind of get shuffled around randomly, and they sort of jar with the arc. But that's more to do with where they're placed. The program. And I think if they're done well, I think it could work perfectly well. But I mean, we've been arguing for a kind of a whole season arc storyline since Jodie Whittaker's first series. So this might be forced on them, but it doesn't feel surprising. It doesn't feel shocking.
It feels like the way they were heading.
But actually, 6 episodes in the season, I think that's quite welcoming. I think a 6 episode arc storyline feels like a good thing. It's almost like that kind of Children of Earth, 5 episodes, 1 a night. They won't do it like that, but it feels a bit like that.
Because 10 episodes or 12 episodes might have felt like it was stretching the story too much, whereas 6 feels like a more natural length for that kind of story.
Yeah, and also, I mean, as far as the effects of COVID goes, I think Doctor Who's been quite fortunate in being able to have this structure. So they've clearly recognised the benefit. I think you're right. Well, initially I thought it was going to be 8 episodes. And I thought, how have they worked it out? How have they worked out 8 episodes? Because if that's one storyline, they must have cut out material or added material or started from scratch. But actually, I think you're right. 6 episodes sounds perfect for having been a 10 episode planned season, and they've just kind of removed the four standalone episodes. That raises the question of, is there material for 4 episodes already lying out there that Big Finish that's going to basically get the mission to Magnox or the Nightmare Fair treatment? Maybe these are the missing Jodie Whittaker stories, or maybe they'll get repurposed with a new showrunner.
It's possible. More likely Big Finish, I'd have thought. Or maybe they'll turn up as books.
Possibly, but they won't be the Chris Chibnall ones. So I'm assuming that the arc storylines will be Chris Chibnall ones, and the non-arc storyline will be other people commissioned. And that makes it possible that another showrunner will just at least read them and think, actually, I'll just put my gloss on these, heavily rewrite them, but the concept's good. Let's go with this one.
Possibly. It depends who the next showrunner is and whether he has a relationship with those, or whether he or she has a relationship with those writers. And that's something that we'll talk about in a few minutes. I guess I suspect that the 6 episodes, the first and last, will be written by Chris Chibnall. The ones in between, some of them might be written by Chris Chibnall. Some of them might be written by X and Chris Chibnall. I can't imagine necessarily that he's doing all 6 solely by himself. I don't suppose it's impossible, but the way Doctor Who's set up and the fact that he's probably had to tap 4 writers on the shoulder and say, I'm sorry, we're not using your script after all. And the way that last year, of those 6 arc episodes, 2 of them had co-writers as well anyway. So I suspect we're not going to have an entirely Chris Chibnall penned series, which I think is slightly a shame, because given how Broadchurch worked, and I really liked the first and third series of Broadchurch, and those were solely Chris Chibnall, apart from 1 episode in series 1, unless I'm misremembering. I think he's better when he's doing that. I think he gets into a groove of things slightly better when he's doing that. So I don't know whether maybe I would prefer that. But the other thing I do want to bring up is, I mean, there's not a lot to talk about from the Comic-Con. I would like to say it was patently obvious from the Comic-Con panel how much those people enjoyed working together and how much they enjoyed making the program. They weren't faking it. They seriously were in love with working with each other and were in love with working on the program. And that, I think that has, to a degree, come across on the screen. I think you can see that to a degree on the screen. I don't think it necessarily makes for the best program. You know, our views on the program are in our past episodes, so we shan't dwell too much on that. But I would like to, for the record, say that was a really nice panel to watch. But they didn't say an awful lot. And the one thing that they did mention that I think we should bring up, perhaps potential spoilers, but only in the speculation, when the person, I can't remember what she was called, who was hosting the panel, asked them each to give a 1-word sort of tease for series 13. Of course, the actors all gave words that really didn't give much of anything away because, you know, they've been told not to spoil anything. Chris Chibnall, and to me, it looked like he hadn't planned this, and he genuinely felt like he was on the spot and reached for a word and then probably said a word that he perhaps afterwards wished he hadn't. The word he came up with was swarm. Now, people have been making allusions to the invisible enemy and such like, obviously, as you would. And clearly, series 13 is not going to be a 6-episode sort of sequel to the invisible enemy. But Chris Chibnall's 1-word tease, swarm, that to me, plus also the fact that several times during the course of the panel, they talked about past monsters that they were working with in a way that suggests it was past monsters that they haven't worked with before. Otherwise, why would they be that excited about working with them? So not Daleks or Cybermen. So what past monsters could you have that might also comprise a swarm? And crucially, I don't know if this is crucial, but it feels to me crucially, because we're talking about a show writer who suddenly started talking about the sort of deep past of the sort of program's history, the program's fictional history. So he's going back to before the program began and talking about the history of the main character from before we knew that character. And one thing that's been said about this species is that they were around in that prehistory. So to me, the word swarm says weeping angels. And that also says to me, that means that we are going to find out, not necessarily Joe Martin be in it, but certainly somebody be in it to represent a pre-William Hartnell Doctor working for, I can't remember what they called, the CIA, the Celestial Intervention Agency, whatever they called them in Fugitive of the Jadoon. That organization with a version of the Doctor will be fighting weeping angels in the prehistory of the program, and that's the story that Series 13 is going to tell. I could be completely barking up the wrong tree. That's my speculation for season 13, given the word swarm and the talk about past monsters. Either of you want to suggest an alternative or argue with me or whatever?
Oh, well. I can see
not an invitation to argue for arguing's sake, Pat.
I mean, obviously, I agree with the Weeping Angels.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because my problem with the 6-episode thing is they've set up the Timeless Children in the middle series. They've introduced Joe Martin as really a really good character. I really like that performance. Really wanted more.
Just to butt in just for a second, I don't think she'll be back. I think
so. My problem is I don't think she'll be back.
Yeah,
and
okay.
I remember thinking at the time, I'm fine with the Timeless Children. This is a really interesting concept. I really like Jo Martin. They have to bring her back. They have to have the time to really run with this Timeless Children thing. And I think even a 6-episode arc storyline, I'm not, even with specials, I'm not sure that feels like a conclusion to something they've only just introduced. If they'd introduced it properly 2 seasons ago and had that big middle season to be the middle act of the Timeless Children story, and then you get the conclusion of the Timeless Children story, I think that would be a balanced way of doing it. But it feels like they've introduced it, now they're concluding it, and obviously the next showrunner is unlikely to run with the Timeless Children. So unless Chibnall's leaving Doctor Who to produce a Doctor Who spin-off called The Timeless Children with a pre-Hartnell Doctor, which I'd be fine with.
Yeah, me too.
then I'm starting to doubt whether this story is going to be told to my satisfaction looking back. It might be. They might like really nail it with these 6, 7, 8, 9 episodes. They might like really sort of run with it and do something different, but they're really going to have to work at it to do it, I think.
Point is, though, they would have done it across 10 episodes and had 4 episodes that were nothing to do with it. So we're kind of just getting the 6 episodes that would have had something to do with it. I think it's nailed on. I could be wrong. Simon, what do you think? Go on, Matt. Go on. Back
well,
to you.
I'm sure it is nailed on. I'm sure. I mean, if they don't bring the Timeless Children back, that idea back, then that would, I think, something really
like
weird is happening. So I definitely think it's nailed on. I just think bring it in one season and then concluding it in the next season. It's not like the Time War, where it was bubbling under for sort of 4 or 5 years.
I think. But yeah, I sort of see what you're saying, but then I don't think they're concluding it this year. I think they're introducing it in the last series and then telling a story that happens within it in this series, and then just leaving it open for anybody else to pick up or not in the future. But I think it's one of those ideas, like the idea of Gallifrey and the Time Lords, that you introduce in order to say something about the character of the Doctor, and then you just leave to be picked up or not, depending on whether anybody else wants to. That's how I see it. Simon, what do you think about anything that we've said there?
I suppose the point is whether there's any more to learn. Really, did we find out everything? And I suppose the character that the linchpin of the whole thing is the Master, because the Master will still have some kind of, if indeed he survived, he will be the one who will be carrying on this vendetta or reacting against his discovery of this information, whereas the Doctor isn't doing that. The Doctor's kind of embraced it in a way, as far as we can tell.
I suspect we won't see Sacha Dhawan again until Jodie Whittaker regenerates in that last special. But that's just
that sounds about right.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's so much about do we have any more to learn. I think we have learned everything we need to learn. I think it's like they've built a paddling pool, and it looks very interesting, but what they haven't done is played in the paddling pool yet. So it's actually using the idea. It's building stories within that idea rather than revealing
I would
it.
like them to build something into the thing that explains why this has suddenly all come to light, apart from the fact that this is a story that Chris Chibnall always wanted to write, because I'd like to know that there's more, because otherwise it feels like it's just a nod and it's kind of he's thrown a pebble into Matt's paddling pool to create ripples and then said, right, I'm off now.
So the Doctor was half human all the time.
Yeah. And this happens all the time. And of course, there are always things coming up that we've never heard about before, and everybody sort of groaned when they started mentioning the hybrid every week because we'd never heard of that before, and yet suddenly here was this really important Time Lord legend. That's just how writing on a show like this works, because you're going to have different showrunners, they're going to have different stories they want to tell, right? That's why I think it has to be nailed on, because I don't think Chris Chibnall brings it up and then does absolutely nothing with it. But like Matt says, I think it's not about whether there's more to learn, it's about whether there's more to be told. And I think you bring something like that into the series, it gives you this whole new let's extend the metaphor, this whole new paddling pool. And yeah, you want to get in that paddling pool and play, surely. So, if I was the Doctor Who showrunner, damn right I'd want to tell something in that universe, that sort of Hartnell universe, because that's a whole new thing to be explored and a whole new way of telling stories that's open. Because here's the thing, this is something that came up on my timeline at some point earlier in the week, and it was before this announcement, and I can't remember exactly what was said. Somebody was saying their complaint was Doctor Who just tells the same type of story over and over again. And I'd say, yes, there's some truth in that, but also that's a format that works, but it allows you to tell different types of stories within the format. So it allows you to address different themes, and it allows you to do different tones and different styles. But essentially, you're always telling alien invasion, mad professor, machinery gone wrong, whatever. There's always a sci-fi twist, and there's always a moral dilemma. Those are the sort of two inherent things in the Doctor Who format, really. Yeah, I think if I was the showrunner, so that's obviously a stupid thing to say inherently, but if I was the showrunner, I don't know, I think I'd be tempted to want to tell stories that were completely outside of that format. And I think it's really difficult when you're the showrunner of an ongoing series to really sort of break that format. And I think both Stephen Moffat and to a little bit Chris Chibnall and a little bit to Russell T Davies did play with that format. So things like Love and Monsters played with that format, but it still had the sci-fi and the moral dilemma, right? So when they played with the format, they were really playing with the mechanics of the format. Stephen Moffat similarly was playing mostly with the mechanics of the format, and Chris Chibnall has a little bit, less obviously than the other two, but I think he has a little bit. I think it's a really difficult thing to do, but I think having this pre-Hartnell universe that sort of opens a door to a different way of telling a story maybe allows you a bit more freedom. So I don't know. I'm saying if I was a post-Chris Chibnall showrunner, I might be tempted to go back into that universe, if only to allow me a bit more freedom in the way you tell the Doctor Who story. So that's one reason for maybe doing it at some point in the future. Obviously that's pure blind speculation at this point. Is there anything else either of you wants to bring up about the trailer or about the Comic-Con? The trailer again was a bit, didn't really say much, alluded a couple of times to it being the Doctor's biggest adventure yet, because of course of the whole, this is going to be one story across 6 episodes, without actually saying in the trailer that it was going to be one story across 6 episodes, thus making the whole biggest adventure yet thing feel like a bit of an empty promise, which it turned out not to be. But do either of you have anything more to say?
Yeah, they were never going to say this series, the Doctor has a mediocre adventure that,
well, yeah,
that she can take or leave. She gets into mild peril. There's the casting news. The
oh sure, yeah.
Whose name obviously I don't have in front of me.
No, and neither do I. No,
he
I
played
don't.
Grey Worm in Game of Thrones.
Yes,
and I saw immediate sort of grumblings on social media that it's not a high profile actor. But to be honest, I think I'm always more excited when it's this kind of actor who's announced rather than an Ian McKellen or Derek Jacobi, because
Plus, I think the thing was, they said we've got a very special guest at the Comic-Con, and it's a new semi-regular or regular or whatever in the series, a guest star in the series. And then they said the name, and everybody over the age of 40 went, oh, that's not a special guest, who's that? And everybody under the age of 40 went, oh yeah, this is this relatively famous pop star who we've all heard of, who also does acting, who's been in this huge high profile program that we all watch. And because he's one of the younger stars of that program, he's one of the characters that we're more attracted to. So everybody over the age of 40 was like, and everybody under the age of 40 was like, excellent.
And it's also an actor who is on the verge of going. So I don't think he is stratospheric at the moment, but he's on the verge of going stratospheric.
I think it's 125,000 Twitter followers at the time of the announcement.
And it's a bit like, in retrospect, announcing Karen Gillan, Kerry Mulligan, or Andrew Garfield is going to be a Doctor Who, and everybody will go, well, who's Kerry Mulligan or who's Andrew Garfield? But now you sort of look back and you think, Were they really in Doctor Who? Were they really?
Yeah. So I think, yes, I definitely think that announcement is one of those ones that sort of divides the. I said over 40 and under 40. You know what I mean? The older fans with the younger fans. There's definitely a bit of a divergence going on there. I suggested that I think he's going to be playing a past incarnation of the Doctor. I still think that there's a good chance that that's true. One thing that was said to me in response to that was it's possible, or it might be even that this person had heard a rumor that this actor's come in to play a time agent from the 51st century in a replacement for the Captain Jack part that was going to be in the series and that no longer is.
I think that's a possibility. The more you think about it, the more likely that sounds. Because again, they bring Captain Jack back. Chibnall clearly likes either the character or John Barrowman. So if they'd have written him in here and they just kind of get a bit cold feet about John Barrowman now, then recasting is perfectly simple. Yeah.
But then they had been filming for several months before the whole sort of Noel Clarke, John Barrowman fuss kicked off. Having said that, the Noel Clarke thing looked like it was going to be obvious several weeks, if not months, before it actually happened. And the John Barrowman thing might also have been a situation that was bubbling over, because I think it had been brought up that although he does this thing about I apologized in 2008 and we drew a line under it, several people have suggested that he has had incidents in the meantime since, including one thing on a radio or something. I don't know. Point being that I'm coming around to is that at the end of Revolution of the Daleks, you've got that weird scene where Captain Jack says goodbye and he's not in the scene. And remember, we all talked about it at the time. Did they have to record this afterwards and he was no longer in Cardiff to do his bit, so they did him as a voiceover or something? Or did they do some rewriting there? Was Captain Jack supposed to be in that final scene? And instead, they went back and redid the final scene with those other actors and either used the dialogue that Jack had already recorded or got him to record something new. I don't know. Did they change it then? Have some kind of prescience about what was going to happen now?
There are also possibilities that they start filming this series sort of still in lockdown, but definitely with travel restrictions from other countries. And depending on where John Barrowman is, if John Barrowman's in lockdown in LA or wherever, John Barrowman might not have been able to get to filming. And then, they cast locally, but cast, a big name. So
as a replacement, that's a fair point too. I don't know, Simon, you any thoughts on that? Or am I putting you on the spot?
No. Okay. I've got no thoughts. I don't think you can second guess any of this. I mean, I do think that Chris Chibnall is probably going to write all the episodes. I think it makes sense that if he's doing an ongoing plot all the way through, then he's going to probably focus on it. And it may be the lockdown gave him the time to do that. He was stuck at home, literally. So who knows? I mean, I hope so, because I think it will give it a consistency of tone, which we've not seen before. Regardless of what your opinion is of him as a writer, it will have a consistency of tone right the way through it. So I just think it's an experiment that's worth doing.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I've seen certain people on Twitter saying, "Oh, this is what the show should have been doing anyway, or needs to do to progress." I mean, I don't think so. I mean, it doesn't have to be written in stone. It doesn't have to be one way or another. But I think it's worth doing this thing at least once.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, then it reverts back to something else next time anyway. So you don't lose anything by not experimenting. I think experimenting is absolutely the right sort of road to pursue. So we've got then 6 episodes in the autumn, 1 at Christmas, New Year, whenever it's going to be, 1 in the spring, they said, which presumably is Easter, and then they're going to record another one, which will go out in the autumn at the BBC's sort of centenary celebrations. Is that what it is? I think it must be, mustn't it? 1922 must be when BBC Radio started, I guess. So then that's going to go out then at some point. I would suggest, if it fits nicely, it might go out on November 23rd. Who knows? That means that Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker are leaving exactly a year before the 60th anniversary. Right, other people have made a big deal about the 60th anniversary and said they ought to have something along the lines of Day of the Doctor to celebrate 60 years. And we've always said, or one of the things that we've said on a number of occasions is, well, it's a 60th. That is not the same as a 50th in any way, shape or form. The next big one after 50 usually tends to be 75. So they may do something for the 60th. What that something might be could take any shape. It's not going to be the same as what we had for the 50th. If Chris Chibnall's leaving and Jodie Whittaker's leaving, and if it was always the plan for them to leave after 3 series, and given that they must have been aware, quite some time ago that 3rd series was going to be autumn 2021, I don't know, but that suggests to me that there's a strong possibility that the next showrunner is already chosen. A very strong possibility the next showrunner is already chosen. Not necessarily because there's a year before they'd even need to start writing, given on what kind of schedule the BBC wants for Doctor Who. But possibly the new showrunner is already chosen. Possibly the new Doctor's already close to being chosen. Certainly a plan might be in hand already for what to do with Doctor Who over the next few years, similar to the one that we learned about that the BBC had with Stephen Moffat and Chris Chibnall, that famous 5-year plan that Stephen Moffat talked about, that, kind of we assumed meant 5 years of Stephen Moffat, but as it turned out, meant Stephen Moffat handing over to Chris Chibnall once Chris Chibnall had finished the 3rd series of Broadchurch. So what I'm saying is, these things are about to happen. We'll maybe have a conversation about who these people might be in a minute. But I'm not going to suggest I think this is the way things are going to go. But certainly I'm going to lay this down as a possibility, because there's, from what I could see on Twitter and on Facebook, there's a lot of talk about, but if Jodie Whittaker goes in autumn 2022, the next episode will be the 60th anniversary special, and the 60th anniversary special will have to introduce a new Doctor and a new showrunner. What a weird way to go about it. And I'm thinking, no, we tend to get Doctor Who every 18 months at the moment, which means spring and then autumn and then skip a year and then spring and then autumn and then skip a year. If we're having it autumn 2021, the next time we're due a series of Doctor Who is spring 2023. So my suggestion is potentially this. Yes, Jodie Whittaker goes in an episode that goes out November 2022, say. Then there's a Christmas special in 2022 or New Year's Day 2023, which introduces the new showrunner and the new Doctor. Then there's a new series of Doctor Who in the spring of 2023. And then you get something for the 60th anniversary in the autumn of 2023, after the showrunner and the Doctor have already had a special and a series under their belts before this potentially big momentous event takes place. Now, could be that I'm way off the beaten track here. Anything could happen. Could be that the BBC decides to rest Doctor Who for a few years and we don't get anything at all on the 60th anniversary, and it comes back in 2025 or 2026 or whatever under an entirely new team to really refresh it with a brand new showrunner and a brand new Doctor and a brand new ethos. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Doctor Who's going to continue in production with a new showrunner. Does what I've just said about when these things will happen, about a season in spring of 2023 before an anniversary special, I'm not mad in saying this, am I? That's quite a sensible thing to say, I think.
Oh, yes.
I can also see them hanging on till the autumn, so there is a proper 60th. It's just a way of promoting the show. I don't think there'll be a special as such unless it ties in with the first episode of the new Doctor. Yes, and they say in its 60th year we have a new Doctor and it's all fresh and new and all that stuff.
That is the other possibility, is that they could stop with Jodie at the end of 2022 and just say, right, there's going to be 1 year off and Doctor Who's going to premiere on November 23rd, 2023 with season 14.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with having a new Doctor as a way of celebrating the 60th. No. I think on the whole, I'd rather have a spring series because you get it sooner than
Yeah.
And actually, it feels sort of more traditional, even though it hasn't been like that for a while. It just feels a bit more like comfortable. I agree that I suspect the new showrunner's already been not in place, but they know the new showrunner. Partly because I wonder if announcing that Chris Chibnall's leaving and Jodie Whittaker's leaving, it's not just news for us, but presumably the BBC would want to be careful about investors or partners, not just getting the news, the whole creative team and the main actor is leaving this programme. We don't know what's going to happen now. I'm assuming that they'll have already been reassured that either there's going to be a break, as you say, there's someone in place.
Yeah,
there has to be continuity.
Moving out. You don't give a date for moving out of your house before knowing where you're going to move to, do you?
Yeah. So I suspect on the back of that, I think they will have identified the new showrunner quite early on and have been courting him or her to make sure they've got space and time.
So we have then, I mean, one of the names that's been bandied about a lot under Chris Chibnall was Pete McTighe, mainly because of the Russell T Davies, Stephen Moffat succession, and because Pete McTighe's been doing so much stuff that he kind of looks like a natural fit. On the other hand, I'd suggest if Pete McTighe's doing things like the on the sofa things on the DVDs, the Blu-rays, rather that they're releasing, that doesn't necessarily look like the actions of a forthcoming showrunner, as opposed to somebody who doesn't have a lot to do on the show and is therefore getting some work in behind the scenes on these sort of extras or something. It doesn't necessarily make Pete McTighe look like the natural successor to me. Do we think it could be Pete McTighe? Do we think it could be somebody who was around before and maybe the BBC want to go back to somebody from before? You know who my preferred name would be in that case. Do we think it's going to be somebody else entirely? Do either of you have any preferences, any realistic ones or any fantasy ones? Because, you know, it's not going to be what's the fate? Fleabag.
Identifying the showrunner is much harder than suggesting names for the Doctor for people who aren't in the industry, because there are so many names that we wouldn't know, or people that are producing television in the States that we wouldn't know. I'd noticed that Kate Herron isn't going to do a second season of Loki, and pretty much Loki is Doctor Who already. She's British. She's clearly knows Doctor Who. She didn't write Loki, but she is a writer, and she's got a strong kind of visual sense and a good sense of controlling the identity of the series. So, you know, and Loki was about the right length for a season of Doctor Who. So,
having not seen Loki yet, I can't comment. I guess the comment I'd have to make is: does she have a relationship with the BBC? Or is she in a position where she might want a relationship with the BBC?
Well, that's so the two sides are what their profile is, what have they done in the past, and what position are they in their career? Would they want to go and live in Cardiff for a year?
Yeah.
Which is exactly the same for actors. You just
the
wouldn't.
Showrunner doesn't actually. So none of the showrunners have been to live in Cardiff, but I get the point you're making. And I've forgotten her name, and so Phoebe Waller-Bridge. That's me being rude for getting her name. So she's out of the BBC's pocket, but now I would have imagined, not necessarily. She's always been one of those choices that people bring up time after time and say she should take over. Simon, is there anybody that you'd like to see doing the job? The new writer?
Not really. No, I think, being honest, as much as there are people who could obviously do the job from the shows past, I think that boat has sailed. I think it's likely that it'll be someone where everyone initially go who, and then they realise that they've seen their work and actually it's pretty good stuff. So I think in much the same way as a lot of these Marvel series are coming out and we don't know the names, and then we realise, oh, hang on, they've done a bit of Game of Thrones, or they've done this, or they've done that. Then I think that may be the way forward. That the BBC are probably casting them that much wider this time, rather than going to the typical dyed-in-the-wool fans who've grown up into showrunners, they may go completely off-piste and grab somebody who can truly bring something new to the show.
Having said that, I think there's a bit of a risk doing that, in that you're going to get somebody in who's not going to know how to make the show. Because I think that's one of the things that there's these sort of continuity announcements have been about, is, Stephen Moffat knows how to make Doctor Who. Chris Chibnall came in and he'd done it slightly differently, but Chris Chibnall knows how to make that kind of television. What did you say her name was? Kate Herron?
Yeah.
From she possibly working at Disney. She knows how to make a series of 6 or 8 episodes, whatever it was. The way we do it in Britain might be so far removed from the way they do it in America that might not necessarily be a good thing. That might not necessarily be in her corner when it comes to making an appointment. So I'm not saying she wouldn't get the job because of that. I'm saying that's a consideration, though, for sure, is that it has to be somebody that BBC can trust to work in their environment and do the job of getting a television programme made under the auspices of BBC Studios and with all the rules and regulations and with the sort of, the workplace atmosphere that would come in tow with that sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, she's done Sex Education, which is British, but it's Netflix. So she's got Netflix experience.
Yeah.
Marvel experience. So I don't know.
She might be able to league price-wise anyway, but
possibly. I mean, I think it depends on whether they're open for a change, whether they want to sort of change the series up, so they break free of the sort of the Russell T Davies, because Russell T Davies is a great scriptwriter, but he's been sort of born and bred in the BBC and in the British television industry, and maybe the next choice, maybe not going down that route, going down somebody with a different experience. Maybe a writer's room would work under that situation. Maybe somebody who's more used to that sort of production.
It's funny you should say that. It just, for some reason, it popped into my head, the idea of a writing partnership. Get 2 people in, like the Russo brothers or someone like that we're not necessarily aware of, to for four shoulders to take the brunt of the thing.
Yeah.
Could
so Peter
be
Harness,
really healthy for the show.
So if you're listening, Peter Harness, and you have got the job and you do want a co-writer available, all 3 of us, that is. Also, the other thing is, the BBC, they might look at Doctor Who and say, okay, this person should be nominally out of our pocket, but hey, let's pay to get this person in to do this job, to give this program a real proper refresh. So yeah, maybe that's what the BBC are thinking. We can't second guess what the BBC are thinking just because they've made 2 continuity appointments of a kind. I don't think Chris Chibnall was a continuity appointment in the same way as Stephen Moffat was by any stretch of the imagination, but it felt like 2 continuity appointments. Maybe that's what they need to go against. Who knows? Doctor, then. So I'm going to say my piece and then we'll move on. So this is how you change attitudes. You overcompensate before you find an equilibrium. In other words, if you work in a workplace where there are no people of color, you're going to have to forgive the way I express this, because it's not an easy thing to express. You have to flood the workplace with people of color in order that everybody accepts in that workplace that having people of color around is not the alternative to the norm, but it is the new norm. And then you can allow a balance to be found. So in other words, if you want to change the way people think about something, you have to force it over the line where it would find a norm, in order that they become so used to that thing that the norm can be found and it doesn't feel like an exception. Because if you just found the norm, then the norm would feel like an exception because it is an exception to the norm that you had before. Do you see what I mean? You have to allow a new normal to be found in between 2 extremes. To which, what I'm obviously going to say is, I think the next Doctor has to be another woman, because although we've had Jo Martin, and although we had that episode where we saw lots of other Doctors where there were also Doctors of colour and Doctors of both genders, I think the next regular Doctor has to also be a woman, in order that for the public, the woman doctor doesn't feel like the exception, but that the new normal is the doctor can be either gender. And I don't think we're at a position where the new normal is that the doctor can be either gender yet. I think we have to force that issue. So, and I don't think it's a case of, oh, my personal preference would be just give it to the best person for the job, no matter what gender they are. You know, I think a personal preference would always be just give it to the best person for the job, regardless of gender. I think it's an issue that has to be addressed. So I think my personal preference has to step aside and say, no, it has to be a woman this time. And then we can go and find a new normal after that. But we have to change the old normal and make the situation not be that Jodie Whittaker feels like the exception. Right, that's my piece. I've had my little bit on the old soapbox. Who do you think the next Doctor might be? Who would you like the next Doctor to be? Have you even thought about it? Because I haven't even thought about it.
Now you've said another woman, then I can just bleat on about Sally Hawkins again, because I just can't. She's just there, framed as far as I'm concerned. She was born to play the Doctor. As to whether they could afford her is another matter. But I think she's probably one of those actors who does like to do things like independent films and cinema every now and again. So maybe she'd want to do something for like a couple of years, like a comfortable job in Cardiff for a couple of years. Who knows?
I'm not sure she's. Maybe it's just a visibility thing. The last couple of years, what's she been in since Paddington 2?
I'm thinking Shape of Water.
Shape of Water, yeah.
No, that's not since Paddington 2, though, is it? That's 4 years ago now, Shape of Water.
She was in, low-key dramas.
Yeah, I'm just thinking Sally Hawkins might not be as much of a stretch as you think, Simon. I mean, which is not to denigrate her career, but I'm just thinking her since Paddington 2, she's not been anything massive profile. And Shape of Water was 2017-18. And of course, we're talking somebody.
Yes, please.
We're talking somebody starting in 2023 as well, of course. So we're talking 2 years down the road from where we're talking now. Really, 18 months.
She's still an Oscar-nominated actress, though.
Oh, I'm not arguing with that.
Peter Capaldi in his own way, I suppose.
Yeah,
that's an Oscar-winning director. Yeah. Matt, do you have anybody in mind?
Well, I quite like Michael Sheen. going completely the opposite direction to what you're saying. But
that's
watched Michael Sheen with David Tennant in the lockdown thing they did. I mean, he's based in Wales already. I think he's Good Omens 2. I mean, there's all of this. However, I think going down the line you were looking at, JR, I think thinking about Tania Miller, who was in The Haunting of Bly Manor, I kind of agree that she would be a strong choice, and she was in Sex Education, coincidentally, with Kate Herron. Kate Herron did Loki. Sophia Di Martino, who played Sylvie in Loki, might be a good choice. Again, she's probably at the right stage of her career that the Doctor would be a high-profile role for her.
What nationality is she?
British. She's English.
Oh, is she? Because I'd like to see an American in the part.
Okay.
Just because it would ruffle feathers, and I don't think the Doctor should be limited by this island. Frankly, the Doctor's an alien and an actor. You know what I mean?
I don't think it should be limited. I think it's just less likely you get an American in the part because, again, the role requires being based in Cardiff or Manchester or wherever for X number of years.
Mind you, there are plenty of Americans who are based over here already. So, I mean, potentially that's a pool we could be choosing from.
Yeah. So, yeah,
there are a few. One of the names, oh, God, I should have looked this up before we came. What was that program recently that was about the non-consensual sex?
Michaela Cole, you're talking about?
Yes, Michaela Cole, I'm talking about.
Yes.
Is she likely? I take it she's a creator in her own right, and to be an actor in somebody else's series, that seems to strike me as would make her less likely. But then it could just be that that's the one program that she has created, and that ordinarily she works not as a creative person like that. It could be that something like Doctor Who is exactly what she wants at this point in her career. So I don't know. Did either of you see that? Because I didn't. Otherwise, I'd have probably remembered her name, right?
I did, and I think
does she have that quality?
She does, but I think I May Destroy You is her Doctor Who. It's her launch pad into stardom. So I think she's already too high profile for agreeing to play the Doctor. So she's got the BAFTA and she's got Emmy Awards or Emmy nominations. So I think she's on her way to kind of the big bucks of Netflix or Amazon or America films, I think. So I think she's already, I mean, it's kind of, as you were suggesting, it's kind of pinpointing exactly the right person who in 2 years' time is going to be at exactly the right point in their career where they'll agree to be in Wales for 3 years and who are high profile enough to be tested in drama, but not so much that they're not going to be, you know. So Phoebe Waller-Bridge is currently shooting the new Indiana Jones film. So Phoebe Waller-Bridge is about 10 stages beyond being cast in Doctor Who, and she's also contributed. What was she writing? Helping scriptwrite. I think she was scriptwriting James Bond. So in creative terms, she's already X number of stages beyond Doctor Who as well. So it's that sort of.
Mind you, we say this, and it's, you know, these things are never totally impossible because you never know quite what a person wants to do. They thought, you know, and this is not the same kind of example by any stretch of the imagination, but they thought that, you know, Catherine Tate would never want to do a whole series of Doctor Who, and she was disappointed only to do one whole series of Doctor Who. She'd rather have done two. So you know what I'm saying? You never quite know. Has anybody? I mean, I've got no suggestions really. I didn't really think about it before we sat down. I don't know. Maybe this is a conversation we'll come back to in the coming weeks. I would imagine that whoever's going to be the next Doctor is probably going to go before the cameras. I don't know, maybe next spring at the earliest. So I guess that's the sort of time frame we're looking at. So we should hear between now and then, I would have thought. But when we'll hear, who knows? I can't imagine we'll hear anytime soon. We might, as Matt suggests, learn who the next showrunner is at some point in the sort of coming weeks. I would have imagined that possibly that's the kind of thing you'd think you'd hear after the series is broadcast. And I'd imagine the series is going to broadcast across October and November. Having said that, I'm pretty sure we heard about Stephen Moffat in the middle of the broadcast of Series 4. So, you know, it's the kind of information that could come out at any time. But unless either of you got anything else you want to add, shall we knock it on the head here? Okay.
I mean, I'm sure we'll come up with some suggestions on showrunners and actors as we go along anyway, which is quite a nice thing, really, isn't it, to just drop it into conversation? So
yeah, we'll probably do that. Right, until we're back to talk about, what did we just do, season 17? So the next one we're going to do is series 10. Until that happens, I was JR.
I was Matt.
I was Simon.
And we'll speak again soon.